The day I discovered the truth was the day my past shattered like glass. For years, I had walked through life believing in the sanctity of my marriage, the warmth of family, and the loyalty of blood. But betrayal is a silent creature. It lurks in the corners, waiting for the right moment to sink its teeth in. It started with a funeral. My uncle, a stern man of few words, passed unexpectedly. At the wake, my family gathered in hushed conversations, their grief tinged with something else: guilt, anxiety, a tension that clung to the air like the scent of burning wood. I saw my cousin Daniel standing in the corner, avoiding my gaze. My wife, Emily, had come too, her fingers gripping my arm a little too tightly, and then I noticed the boy, a child no older than 7. Something about him made my breath catch. A resemblance I couldn't ignore, not to me, to Daniel. A small comment from my aunt cracked the first fracture in my world. She sighed, looking at the boy with melancholy. "Poor thing," she murmured. "Born into such complicated circumstances." Complicated. The word festered in my mind. I didn't confront Emily immediately. Instead, I dug. And the more I dug, the more the ground beneath me collapsed. A late-night conversation with my father, too much whiskey loosening his tongue, revealed the first horror. The boy was my cousin's son. My cousin Daniel. My family had known. They had all known. I sat in the darkness that night, my hands trembling. 7 years. 7 years of deception. 7 years of looking into the eyes of the woman I loved, never knowing the depth of the secret she carried. When I finally confronted her, Emily's face turned pale. "Who told you?" she whispered. "Not a denial, not even an attempt to lie." My world tilted. "You should have told me," I said, my voice a whisper of thunder before the storm. Tears pooled in her eyes, but I wasn't interested in tears. I wanted the truth. The raw, ugly, unfiltered truth. It came out in pieces. A moment of weakness, a drunken mistake, a secret pregnancy. My family, fearing the destruction of everything we had built, had conspired to keep it hidden. "For my sake," they said. "For my sake?" I laughed bitterly. "You stole my right to the truth. You stole my choice. Daniel, that coward, never once met my gaze. I should have punched him, should have torn him apart. But what would it change? The past was already written in ink, and the stains wouldn't wash away. Instead, I made a decision that stunned them all. I walked away from my wife, from my family, from the tangled web of lies they had spun for years. And as I stepped into the night, I felt something strange. Not just anger, not just pain, freedom. They had stolen my past, but my future? That was still mine, and I would make damn sure it belonged to me alone. The end. Leaving wasn't the hard part. It was the silence that followed. The deafening quiet of being cut off from the life I had built, the people I had once called family. The phone calls stopped. The messages dwindled. It was as if I had never existed. Good. Buried myself in work, in travel, in anything that put distance between me and the past. But no matter how far I ran, the betrayal still clung to me like a shadow. Then one evening, a message came. Not from Emily, not from Daniel, from an unknown number. "You don't know the whole story. Meet me at Riverside Cafe tomorrow, 8 p.m. I should have ignored it, should have deleted it and moved on. But curiosity is a cruel thing. The meeting. The next night, I walked into the cafe, scanning the dimly lit booths. Then I saw her, my aunt, Daniel's mother. She looked tired, older than I remembered. She wasted no time. "You think you know everything," she said, stirring her coffee. "But you don't." I said nothing. She sighed. Did anyone ever tell you why we kept it secret? My jaw clenched. Because you wanted to protect your golden boy Daniel? Because my feelings didn't matter? A bitter smile crossed her lips. That's what you think? That we were protecting him? She leaned in. No, we were protecting you, I scoffed. From what? She hesitated, then pulled out an envelope. Your father didn't tell you everything. I opened it. Inside were hospital records, DNA test results, proof that the boy wasn't just Daniel's son, he was mine. My breath hitched. The world swayed. Impossible. My voice cracked. You left too soon, she said. Emily never wanted to tell you. She was afraid. Afraid of what? I whispered. She exhaled slowly. Afraid of what you'd do when you found out the truth about Daniel. A cold dread crawled up my spine. What truth? My aunt hesitated before she spoke the words that would change everything. Daniel isn't your cousin, I blinked. What? He's your brother. The cafe spun around me. The real betrayal. I sat there, stunned, as she unraveled the final sickening twist. My father, my own father, had an affair years ago. Daniel was the result. My mother had found out but chose to stay silent for the sake of the family. When Emily got pregnant, my father saw an opportunity to cover up his past, to manipulate the truth, to erase the evidence. He convinced everyone, including Emily, that the baby couldn't be mine, that the scandal would destroy everything, that my life would be better if I never knew. So they let me walk away. You were never supposed to find out, my aunt whispered. I stood up, my hands shaking. Does Daniel know? She nodded. He's known for years. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. My own blood had deceived me. Not just my wife, not just my cousin, my brother, and my son. My son had grown up without me. I walked out of that cafe with only one thought in my mind. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. To be continued. I drove without knowing where I was going. The city blurred past me, streetlights flickering like ghosts. My hands were tight on the wheel, my mind a storm of rage, grief, and something worse, determination. They thought I would never find out. They thought they had erased my past, but now I knew the truth, and I was going to burn down every last lie they built. The confrontation. I didn't go to Emily first. I went to my father. The house was the same as it had always been. Too big, too pristine, like a museum of the life I used to have. I didn't. Knock. I walked right in. He was in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey. When he saw me, he barely reacted. You know, he said simply. My blood boiled. You sat there and watched me walk away from my own son. You let me suffer for years. And for what? Your pride? Your reputation? He sighed, setting his drink down. It was never about that. Then what was it about? His eyes met mine. It was about you. I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Me? You destroyed my life for my own good? That's rich, even for you. You weren't ready to be a father, he said. And Emily? She was scared. She believed what I told her, that if you knew the truth, you'd never forgive her, that you'd never stay, so you manipulated her. Like you manipulate everyone. He didn't deny it. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to throw that glass against the wall and watch it shatter the way my world had. But I didn't. Instead, I turned to leave. You're wrong about one thing, I said, over my shoulder. I am ready to be a father, and I will be, whether you like it or not. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Good. Emily. She looked like she had seen a ghost when she opened the door. Where is he? I asked. Her breath hitched. Who? You know who. Tears welled in her eyes. You weren't supposed to find out. But I did. She swallowed hard. Please, just listen. No. You listen, I said, stepping closer. You stole 7 years from me. 7 years I can never get back, but I won't let you steal another second. Her voice broke. I didn't know what else to do. I was terrified. I wanted to hate her. But looking at her now, I saw something else. Guilt. Pain. Regret. Let me see him, I said. My voice quieter now. She hesitated. Then finally she stepped aside. My son. He was in his room, playing with a set of toy cars. When he looked up at me, something inside me cracked. He had my eyes. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. He didn't know me. To him, I was a stranger. I knelt down. Hey, buddy. He blinked. Who are you? The words hit me harder than any punch ever could. I glanced at Emily. She wiped at her tears and whispered, His name is Noah. Noah. I looked back at him and forced a smile. That's a cool name, Noah. My throat tightened. I'm someone who's going to be around from now on, if that's okay with you. He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. I exhaled, something warm breaking through the ice in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt something close to hope. But this wasn't over. Yet Daniel was next, and he wouldn't get off so easy. To be continued. Daniel was going to pay. Not with fists, not with shouting, with something worse. The truth. Hunting the liar, I didn't tell Emily where I was going when I left. I didn't need to. She knew. Daniel's apartment was on the other side of town, tucked, away in a quiet neighborhood. I stood outside his door, my fists clenched. He had been my cousin, my brother, my betrayer, and he had everything I didn't. 7 years with my son. I knocked once, then again, harder. When the door finally swung open, Daniel stood there in sweatpants and a hoodie, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The guilt was written all over his face. Jesus, he muttered, rubbing his face. I was wondering when you'd show up. I pushed past him and stepped inside. The place was a mess. Half-empty bottles, takeout containers, clothes thrown over furniture, like someone whose life was coming. Apart at the seams. Good. You knew, I said coldly. He sat down on the couch, elbows on his knees. Yeah. For years. A slow nod. Yeah. And you said nothing. He let out a bitter laugh. What was I supposed to say? Hey, by the way, I slept with your wife, but the baby's actually yours? You would have killed me. I stepped closer. I still might. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I never wanted this man. Then why did you do it? Silence. Then, finally, a whisper. Because I hated you. I froze. Daniel met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw it. The resentment, the jealousy, the bitterness that had been festering for years. You were always the golden boy, he muttered. Dad's favorite, the one who had it all. And me? I was the secret son, the mistake, the one he barely acknowledged. Do you know what it's like growing up in your shadow, watching you get everything? I wanted? My stomach twisted. So you slept with my wife out of revenge? He shook his head. No, at first it was just a mistake. We were both drunk, both angry. But then she got pregnant and Dad... He swallowed. Dad saw a way to fix everything. He told us to lie. Said it was the only way to keep the family together. And I listened. I stared at him, my hands shaking. All these years, I had blamed Emily the most. But now, I saw the real mastermind. Behind it all, not Daniel, not Emily, my father. He had orchestrated everything, pulled the strings, manipulated us like pawns in his game, and I was done playing. The last betrayal, I turned to leave. That's it? Daniel asked. "You're just gonna walk away?" I paused in the doorway. "I have a son to raise, a life to rebuild. I don't have time for cowards." His face crumbled. He knew. We knew. Whatever brotherly bond we might have had was dead. The reckoning I didn't stop, not until I was standing at my father's doorstep again. This time he didn't look surprised. "You came back," he said simply. I stepped inside, my voice calm. Too calm. "I want you to tell me the truth, the whole truth." He exhaled, sitting down. "And if I do?" Then I decide what happens next. A flicker of something, fear, crossed his eyes. Good. For the first time in my life, he was afraid of me, and he should be. Because I wasn't his pawn anymore. I was his reckoning. For the first time, my father looked old. Not in the way time naturally wears a man down, but in the way guilt erodes a soul. Good. He had built this empire of lies, brick by brick. Now I was here to burn it down. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, as if searching for answers in its depths. "You want the truth?" I folded my arms. "No more half-truths. No more protecting me. Just the truth." A long silence stretched between us. Then he nodded. "The mastermind's confession." "It started before you married Emily," he said. "Long before. I knew about Daniel from the beginning. I paid off his mother to keep quiet, made sure no one knew. I had another son. I already knew this part. What I didn't know was why he had kept it from me for so long. Then you and Emily got together," he continued. "And I saw an opportunity. My blood turned to ice." "An opportunity?" His fingers tightened around the glass. "You and Daniel were always going to clash. He hated you, resented everything you had. I knew he'd find a way to ruin you eventually. But I also knew you were my real legacy. You were the one with the future." I clenched my fists. "So you let my brother sleep with my wife?" He scoffed. "Do you think I wanted that to happen? Of course not. But once it did, I had a choice. Either let it destroy everything or use it to control the fallout." "You didn't control anything," I spat. "You destroyed my life." He shook his head. "I preserved it. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tear this whole house down with my bare hands. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled. A slow, cold, knowing smile. The turn. "You think you still have control," I said, "that you can talk your way out of this. But you're wrong." He raised a brow. "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and turned the screen toward him. It was recording. His face paled. "I sent the whole thing to my lawyer the moment I walked in," I said. "Your confession. Every twisted word." "You wouldn't," he murmured. I stepped closer. "Watch me." For the first time, I saw something I had never seen in my father before. Panic. He stood up fast, knocking over his glass. "You don't know what you're doing, son." I tilted my head. "No, you don't know what I'm doing." His breathing was uneven now. "You leak that, and everything falls apart. Our name, our business. I don't care about the name anymore," I said. "I care about my son, the one you tried to erase from my life." Silence. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "What do you want?" I had him. I had the man who had controlled my entire life, begging. I leaned in, my voice ablaze against his pride. "You're going to sign over every asset, every dollar, every piece of this empire you built. To me, you're going to vanish, disappear, and you're never going to interfere in my life again." His nostrils flared. "And if I don't?" I grinned. "Then I bury you." I let the words sink in. I saw the war in his eyes, the rage, the defeat, and then acceptance. He nodded, and just like that, the king fell. The aftermath days later, the paperwork was signed. My father disappeared from the public eye. Daniel, he tried to reach out. tried to fix what could never be repaired. I let him talk. Then I told him to stay the hell out of my life. Emily? She cried when I told her the truth. She swore she had never known the full extent of the lies. I believed her. But forgiveness, that would take time. And Noah? Noah was the only thing that mattered. The first time I took him out for ice cream, he held my hand, looked up at me with cautious eyes, and asked, "Are you really staying?" I knelt down, met his gaze, and promised, forever, the end. Forever. That was the promise I made to Noah. And unlike the promises my family had made to me, I intended to keep it. But even when the past is buried, its ghosts don't rest easy. The fallout from my father's downfall was swift. The business world whispered, speculated. My father vanished like a shadow at dawn, leaving me with everything he had built and all the enemies that came with it. But I didn't care, because my real battle wasn't in boardrooms. It was at home. Emily's. Truth, Emily wanted to talk. Needed to. I could see it in the way she hovered near me when I came to pick up Noah, the way she swallowed her words before they left her lips. One evening, I finally gave in. We sat on opposite ends of her couch, the distance between us filled. "With 7 years of betrayal." "I didn't know," she said, her voice raw. "About Daniel, about your father's plan." "I swear to you, I didn't know." I studied her. I had spent so long seeing her as the villain, the betrayer, but now I wasn't so sure. "You knew enough," I said. "You knew the baby might be mine, and you let me walk away." She closed her eyes, her fingers gripping her sleeves. "I was scared. Your father, he made me believe I was protecting you, that if you knew you'd hate me, that you'd leave anyway, but this way, at least you wouldn't have to suffer." I let her words settle. "You were wrong," I said simply. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I know." Silence. Then, softly, "Do you hate me?" The answer should have been easy. But as I looked at her, the woman I had once loved, the mother of my son, I realized something. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. "I don't know what I feel," I admitted. "But it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is Noah." She nodded, wiping her tears. I want to make things right." I met her gaze. "Then be a good mother, and let me be a father to him." "No." More lies. No more secrets. Just truth. She nodded again, and for the first time in years, I saw something real in her eyes. Hope. Daniel's last move. Just when I thought it was over, Daniel showed up at my doorstep. I opened the door to find him, standing there, a duffel bag over his shoulder, a fresh bruise on his cheek. "Can we talk?" he asked. I should have slammed the door in his face, but something in his eyes stopped me. Regret. I stepped aside. He walked in looking around like he was seeing my world for the first time. "Nice place." "Cut the small talk," I said. "Why are you here?" He exhaled sharply. "Dad disowned me." A bitter laugh escaped me. "And that's my problem?" "He took everything," Daniel continued. "Money, connections. I'm nothing to him now." I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Must be hard. Betraying your own blood only to get burned in the end." He flinched. "I deserve that." I didn't disagree. Then softly he said, "I never hated you, you know." I raised a brow. "You sure?" "Had a funny way of showing it." "I was jealous," he admitted. "But I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted to be seen. By him. By you. By everyone." I stared at him for a long time. The brother I never knew I had. The rival I had always resented. And now he was just lost. I sighed. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you." He nodded. "I don't expect you to. But I added. I do know what it feels like to have your entire world ripped away. His eyes met mine, surprised. I gestured to the duffel bag. You need a place to crash? He hesitated. For a little while. I stepped back, giving him room to enter. Then don't make me regret this. The future things didn't fix themselves overnight. Emily and I learned how to co-parent. The wounds between us were still raw, but Noah was the bridge we both needed to cross. Daniel stayed in the guest room. He was still a stranger in many ways, but maybe, just maybe, he could become something more. And my father? He was gone. A ghost in the wind. But his legacy? That was mine now, and I intended to rebuild it, without lies, without manipulation. For me, for Noah. For the future I had almost lost, and this time, no one was going to take it from me. Time doesn't heal wounds. It just teaches you how to live with the scars. Months passed. Life moved forward, but the past had left its fingerprints on everything. Emily and I found a rhythm, not as lovers, not as enemies, but as something in between. Co-parents, bound by a boy with my eyes and her stubbornness. Daniel? He stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in his life, he had a chance to belong. But peace was a fragile thing, and in my family, it never lasted long. A stranger in the darket started with a letter. No return address, no name. Just an unmarked envelope slid under my door. I almost tossed it, but something about it felt wrong. Inside was a single sheet of paper. You don't know the whole truth, but I do. Meet me at midnight, 1452 Holloway Road. Come alone. No signature, no explanation, just a warning scribbled in the corner. Your father lied about more than you think. A chill crawled down my spine. I had spent months untangling my father's web of lies, destroying the empire he had built on. Manipulation. Reclaiming my son, my life. But now, someone was telling me there was more? The meeting Holloway Road was abandoned at night. A row of decaying warehouses, windows broken, metal rusting. The kind of place where things disappeared, including people. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the way, my hand resting near the knife I had tucked inside my jacket. I wasn't stupid. If this was a setup, I'd be ready. A lone street lamp flickered above the warehouse entrance. The door was already open. I stepped inside and froze. Because the person waiting for me wasn't a stranger. It was my father. The ghost returns. He looked different, thinner. The sharpness in his eyes dulled. By something I had never seen before, desperation. You're supposed to be gone, I said, voice cold. He smirked. And yet, here I am. I stayed near the door, my fingers tightening around the handle of my knife. You sent the letter. He nodded. I knew you wouldn't come otherwise. I laughed, bitterly. You really think there's anything you can say to me now? His smirk faded. There's one more lie, he said. One more truth I never told you. I shook my head. I don't care anymore. You should. He stepped closer. Because it's about Noah. Everything in me went still. I know the DNA test proved he was yours, my father said. But what if I told you that wasn't the whole story? My breath hitched. What are you talking about? I demanded. He exhaled slowly. You only ever saw the results I wanted you to see. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. You manipulated the test, I whispered. His silence was my answer. I took a step forward, rage boiling under my skin. Then whose son is he? For the first time, my father looked uncertain, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, That's what I need to tell you. Blood lies silent. Part 8, my heart pounded like a war drum. I had spent months piecing together the truth. Months believing I finally knew who Noah was, that he was mine, and now my father, this liar, this manipulator, was telling me it wasn't. Over? I clenched my fists. Say it. He swallowed hard, as if the words were razor blades in his throat. You're not Noah's father. The world tilted. A slow, creeping silence filled the space between us. No, I whispered. That's a lie. The test was real, he interrupted. But it wasn't yours. I went numb. I had seen the test with my own eyes. My DNA. Noah's. A match. But if my father had manipulated it, then whose DNA had they used? I felt sick. Who is his father? My father hesitated. Then, finally, I don't know. I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. What the hell do you mean? You don't know? He ran a hand over his face. For the first time in my life, he looked tired, almost human. When Emily got pregnant, we knew it could be you, but we also knew it could be someone else. The word slammed into me like a freight train. Someone else. You knew she cheated on both of us, I whispered. He nodded. There was another man, but she never told me who, only that it wasn't Daniel. And by the time the baby was born, I couldn't risk the truth. So I had a different test done. A bitter laugh clawed up my throat. So the test you gave me was just a rigged confirmation of what you wanted me to believe? Yes. I turned away, gripping the edges of a rusted metal table to keep from losing myself. Noah wasn't Daniel's. Noah wasn't mine. Noah was a stranger's? I thought about the boy who had called me dad for months now. The boy I had sworn to protect. The boy who, despite everything, felt like mine. I turned back to my father, my vision burning. Why are you telling me this now? Because I don't have much time left, he said. And because, despite everything, you deserve the truth. I scoffed. The truth? You don't even know the full truth. He hesitated. But we can find out. I froze. He slid a small folder across the table. This is everything I could find on Emily during that time. If we follow the trail, we might find the real father. My hands shook as I reached for the file. Deep down, I already knew the truth. Noah wasn't my son, but there was one thing my father could never manipulate. Love, and no test in the world could change what I felt for that boy. So I took the file. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed to know what came next. And this time, I would decide the ending. To be continued. I drove home in silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat, unopened. It felt like a bomb, a ticking reminder that everything I had fought for, everything I had believed, was hanging by a thread. Noah wasn't mine. That truth should have shattered me, but it didn't. Because love wasn't built on blood. It was built on late-night stories when he couldn't sleep, on scraped knees and whispered reassurances, on the way he looked at me, not as a stranger, not as a substitute, but as his father. And no DNA test could take that from me. But I still had one question left. Who was his real father? The file I sat at my kitchen table staring at the folder. It felt heavier than it should have. Inside my father's final lie, or maybe his first act of truth. I exhaled and opened it. A few faded receipts. A list of numbers I didn't recognize. Hotel bookings. All from around the time Emily got pregnant. But one thing stood out. A name, scrawled at the bottom of a crumpled napkin, barely legible. Liam Carter. I frowned. The name meant nothing to me. I pulled out my phone and searched it, and my stomach dropped. Because Liam Carter wasn't just anyone. He was Emily's ex, the one before me, the one she had sworn she was done with, and the one she had lied about. The confrontation, Emily answered on the second ring. "Hey, who the hell is Liam Carter?" I cut in. A long, frozen silence. Then, her voice, small. "Where did you hear that name?" "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "You know exactly where I heard it." More silence. Then, barely above a whisper, "You weren't supposed to know." My grip tightened around the phone. "So it's true?" She exhaled shakily. "Yes," my pulse pounded. "Is he Noah's real father?" I don't know." Her voice cracked. "I never got a test." I closed my eyes. Lie after lie after lie. "You let me believe he was mine," I said, my voice low. "You let me build a life around him. And all this time, you weren't even sure." Tears laced her voice. "I didn't know what to do. I was scared, and then your father got involved, and he told me the best thing for everyone was to let you believe. To let me believe a lie." I snapped. She didn't argue. Because we both knew the truth now. "I need to find him," I said. "Liam." Her breath hitched. "Why?" "Because if he's Noah's father, he deserves to know." She hesitated. "And if he is?" I swallowed hard. "If he is, then I walk away." The words hurt, more than they should have. But if Liam was Noah's real father, then I had no right to keep him from his son, even if it meant losing everything. Emily gave me an address, and just like that, my whole world was set on fire again. The meeting Liam. Carter lived in a rundown apartment complex on the other side of town. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. Liam stood there, shirtless, covered in tattoos. His knuckles bruised, eyes sharp, guarded. "You're a hard man to track down," I said. He smirked. "Depends on who's looking." I didn't waste time. "Do you know about Noah?" The smirk faded. His posture stiffened. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, "I suspected." That was all I needed to hear. "Then let's find out for sure." I pulled a DNA test from my jacket pocket. Liam stared at it, then at me, and then, finally, he nodded. One more test, one final truth, and whatever the results were, I wasn't sure I was ready. Liam's apartment smelled like cheap beer and regret. He sat across from me, rolling the DNA test kit between his fingers. His tattoos stretched over his knuckles as he gripped it tighter. "You really think this is necessary?" he asked. I leveled, my gaze at him. "Do you?" A long silence. Then he sighed, tearing open the kit. "Let's get it over with." He swabbed the inside of his cheek, sealed the sample, and handed it to me. His hands were steady, but his eyes weren't. "You scared?" I asked. He smirked, but there was no humor in it. "You?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know what scared me more, finding out that Noah wasn't mine, or finding out that he was, waiting for the truth. The next few days crawled by like years. Emily checked in, but our conversations were short, strained. She was just as afraid of the answer as I was. Daniel, surprisingly, stayed quiet about it. He hadn't asked, hadn't pried. Maybe he understood that this was a war I had to fight alone, and Noah was the only thing that felt real. He still looked at me like I was his world. He still reached for my hand when he got nervous. Still called me Dad. But what if, after all this, I wasn't? The results. The email came at exactly 9:17 a.m. DNA results, available. Now my stomach clenched. I sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the screen. One click. That's all it would take. But my fingers felt frozen, because once I saw the truth, there was no going back. I took a deep breath, and I clicked. The results loaded. I scanned the page, my heart pounding. And then, I stopped breathing. The answer, Noah, wasn't mine. But he wasn't Liam's either. The test was negative. Liam Carter wasn't Noah's biological father. I gripped. The edges of the table, my vision swimming, everything had led to this moment. And now I had more questions than before. If it wasn't me? If it wasn't Daniel? If it wasn't Liam? Then who? Emily's last lie. I drove straight to Emily's house. She opened the door, her face pale. You got the results. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. You told me it was between me and Liam. Her throat bobbed. I thought it was. I pulled out my phone, shoving the results toward her. You thought? Tears filled her eyes. I don't know who else it could be. I searched. Her face, looking for a lie. Looking for the woman I once thought I knew. You're sure? I asked. She nodded. I swear to you, A knock at the door. Emily and I both turned. 3 sharp knocks. Precise. Expectant. She hesitated before opening it. And when she did, the world shifted. Because the man standing on the other side wasn't a stranger. He was someone I had known my entire life. And the moment I saw his face, I knew. Noah's real father had just come knocking. I thought I had already seen every twist my life could take. I was wrong. The man at the door stood in front of me with an air of quiet confidence. But his eyes, dark and familiar, were all I needed to see. I didn't recognize him at first. Not until the way he held himself. The way his lips curled into a tight smile that was too knowing, too assured. Luke. I knew him from my childhood, though we hadn't spoken in years. He was one of the cousins who had always stayed on the periphery, never truly involved in the family drama. But I had never expected this. He stepped past Emily, his eyes scanning the room like a man who'd been here before. And in a way, he had. I stood frozen. What the hell are you doing here? He didn't flinch at my tone. Instead, he met my gaze steadily. You don't need to ask me that. I clenched my fists. You're Noah's father. Luke smiled, but it wasn't a smile of joy or reunion. It was a smile that carried secrets. I guess it's about time you figured it out, he said softly. You were never meant to be the one. I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, and now Luke had just dragged me deeper. I turned to Emily, my voice hoarse. You knew! She lowered her head, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't want you to find out this way. Luke sighed, stepping into the living room. It was never supposed to happen like this. But it did. I was running on fumes. Every instinct in me screamed to punch him, to demand answers, to make him pay for everything. But all I could do was stare at him, my mind racing to comprehend the mess I was tangled in. You're his father, I repeated, trying to make sense of it. The past, the lies, everything. It felt like the ground beneath me was giving way. Yes, Luke answered, his voice calm, almost detached. I am. But why the hell didn't you come forward sooner? I demanded. Why let me think he was mine? He looked at me, almost pityingly. Because you were never supposed to be part of this, Caleb. It was never your role. It was always mine. The words hit harder than I could process. I had raised Noah. I had loved him. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every moment that made me his father. All of it felt like a lie. I was trembling with rage. How long? Luke exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. A long time? Too long. Emily stepped forward, her voice shaking. Luke, this isn't helping. Don't try to protect him. I snapped. It's too late for that. But Luke didn't seem bothered by my anger. He seemed to accept it, like it was an inevitable part of the story. Look, I didn't want to come back. Not like this, he said. But things got out of hand. Your father, don't you dare mention him, I snarled. Luke took a step back, raising his hands in mock surrender. Fine, but you have to understand. I didn't want to steal your life, Caleb. I didn't want you to end up in this mess. I was struggling to wrap my mind around the truth, but I couldn't let it go. Then why now? Why come to me now? Luke's eyes darkened. Because I've got nothing left, Caleb. I'm empty. But Noah is mine. I owe him the truth. He deserves to know his father. Everything I had believed was a lie. The family ties, the legacy I had tried to rebuild, it was all broken now. I didn't raise him for you to come in and take him from me, I said, my voice shaky but determined. Luke stepped forward, his gaze softer now. No one's taking him, Caleb. He's still your son in every way that matters. I'm not here to change that, but you are here, I snapped, to claim him. He didn't deny it. I have to. He has a right to know, to decide. It hit me then. This wasn't about me. It wasn't about Emily or Luke. It was about Noah, the boy who had become everything to me, who had turned my world upside down and who was now caught in a war between two men who thought they were his father. I rubbed my eyes, fighting back tears. What do we do now? Luke looked at me, his expression unreadable. We give him the choice. The choice, it wasn't easy. Nothing about this was. But in the end, the choice wasn't mine. It wasn't Luke's either. It was Noah's. He was 10 now, and the world he knew was about to shift in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. I sat with him on the couch, trying to mask the turmoil inside. Hey, buddy, I said softly. I need to ask you something important. Noah looked up from his video game, his eyes wide with curiosity. What's up, Dad? I fought to keep my voice steady. There's something I need to tell you. Something about your dad. His brow furrowed. You are my dad. I smiled faintly. I know. But there's someone else who needs to be part of this too. Someone who's been a part of your life from the very beginning. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Who? I looked him in the eye. His name is Luke, and he's your father too. The room fell still. Noah blinked a few times, processing. His eyes searched mine for an answer, for something more. Does that mean? He began, his voice trembling. Noah sat still on the couch, his small hands clutched tightly around the remote, his eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment, the world felt too heavy for his little shoulders. The weight of it, of everything, pressed in on us all. He blinked, looking back and forth between me and Luke. There was no anger in his eyes, no bitterness, just a quiet confusion. I couldn't blame him. How could I expect a 10-year-old to understand the mess of lies and betrayals that had been stitched together into his existence? I leaned forward, keeping my voice soft. Noah, I want you to know something. You are my son. Always have been. And always will be. Nothing can change that. Noah's gaze flickered toward Luke for a moment before returning to me. There was hesitation, a child's natural resistance to the unknown, but the trust in his eyes was still there, lingering. But, he's my dad too, he asked quietly, his voice fragile, like he was testing the weight of the words. Luke nodded, but his expression softened, no longer carrying the edge it had when he first walked in. Yeah, kid, I'm your dad. In some ways, I've always been. I could see it then. The way Luke's eyes glinted with regret, the way he shifted his weight uncomfortably. He wasn't proud of how things had played out, and maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as cold as I thought. But regret wouldn't undo the years I'd spent as Noah's father. It wouldn't erase the moments we shared, the love we built. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was about Noah. I reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. This doesn't mean I'm going anywhere, I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. It just means you have two people who care about you. Luke's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I'd seen him, there was something resembling understanding there. He wasn't trying to take my place, and I wasn't trying to erase his. We were both just trying to give Noah the space to decide what he wanted. Noah didn't say anything for a long moment. His gaze moved from Luke to me, then back again, as if weighing the very words he'd heard. Finally, he spoke. "I don't know what to do." I smiled, gently squeezing his shoulder. "You don't have to do anything right now. It's okay to be confused. We're here, and we'll figure it out together." Luke nodded, looking at Noah with a tenderness that had been absent earlier. "You don't have to choose right now. We'll give you time." The room was filled with a strange quiet after that. The kind of quiet that happens when the storm has passed, but the damage is still being assessed. For once, I felt something shift inside me. The anger, the betrayal, the years of uncertainty, they were still there. But now there was something else, too. A sliver of hope. Maybe things wouldn't be perfect. Maybe nothing would ever be the same again. But maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. The days after. The next few days were filled with an awkward, heavy silence. Noah withdrew a little, retreating into his games and his books, trying to process everything in his own way. Emily, after Luke's visit, had been uncharacteristically quiet. She didn't reach out much, and I didn't push her. She had a lot of her own guilt to work through. Luke, though, didn't disappear. He hung around the edges of our lives always, lurking just out of reach, waiting for Noah to give him something more. He wasn't forcing his presence, but I could tell he was just waiting. I didn't know if I would ever fully trust him again. There was too much history, too many layers of lies and deceit. But I did know one thing. I couldn't stand in Noah's way, not now. I caught a glimpse of Noah in the living room one afternoon. His face was lit by the glow of the TV, but his mind seemed elsewhere. I sat down beside him, my voice soft. "How are you doing, buddy?" He shrugged, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "I don't know what to think." "I know," I said, gently. "This is a lot, and you don't have to make a decision right away. I'm here for you, no matter what." He nodded but didn't say anything. For the first time, I wondered if Noah would ever find a place in this family where he truly belonged. A place where the secrets and the lies weren't hanging over us, like a storm waiting to break. But as I watched him, I realized that maybe the storm was already over. Maybe this was the calm before everything finally made sense. The revelation was 2 days later when Noah came to me, his footsteps soft on the floorboards. He stood in the doorway of my bedroom, his hands clasped behind his back. "Dad?" I looked up from the papers I'd been sorting through and smiled. "Yeah, buddy?" "I've been thinking." "About what?" He bit his lip, clearly hesitant. Then, with a small breath, he spoke. "I don't want to choose between you and Luke." "I don't think I have to." My heart skipped. "You don't," I said, standing up and crossing the room to him. "You don't have to choose. You don't have to pick one of us." Days turned into weeks, and life, after the storm, slowly began to regain a rhythm. The tension in our home had dissipated, but the scars of the past still lingered like faint echoes of a time I couldn't forget. Emily, Luke, and I had come to an uneasy truce. We were all trying to rebuild, trying to carve out a new version of this fractured family. But Noah had been the glue that held it all together. His decision to love both of us, to not feel torn, was the foundation we all needed to stand on. We had a new understanding, though it wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. There was still something unsettled in the air, something that none of us could shake. But for now, we were moving forward. An unexpected visit one evening, as I was finishing dinner, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't unusual, But when I opened it, I found myself staring at someone I didn't expect. It was Daniel. His tall frame filled the doorway, his expression unreadable. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, since the night we confronted the truth about Noah. He had stepped back, keeping his distance. For someone I'd thought of as family, his absence had been glaring. "Caleb," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in, and he followed me into the living room. Noah was sitting on the couch watching TV, but when he saw Daniel, his eyes lit up, the familiar sense of family rushing back to him. "Uncle Daniel!" Noah jumped up, running to him for a hug. Daniel smiled faintly, embracing him before settling onto the couch. He glanced at me, his face still unreadable. "How's everything going?" he asked, his tone neutral. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "We're making it work." He nodded, looking at Noah again before speaking. "I wanted to come by, apologize for not being around. I guess I was processing. I raised an eyebrow, suddenly unsure of where this conversation was heading. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. When everything came to light, I thought I had my place in the family. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, but I also didn't want to just fade into the background. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure how I felt about Daniel's absence. He had been a constant in Noah's life, a reassuring presence, yet he had distanced himself when everything got messy. "You're still part of this family, Daniel," I said after a beat. "You always have been." He met my gaze, his expression softening. That's what I needed to hear. It wasn't the reconciliation I had hoped for or the reunion I had imagined. It was something smaller, quieter, a step toward healing. "I'll always be here for Noah," Daniel said. "I might not have been the best when everything exploded, but I care about him. I care about you too, Caleb. I just didn't know how to deal with the mess." I nodded slowly, feeling a shift in the air between us. "None of us knew how to deal with it." Daniel smiled faintly, the tension easing from his shoulders. "Well, I'm here now." Noah, sensing the calm, sat back down on the couch. "We can play a game if you want," he offered eagerly. Daniel chuckled, a genuine sound that I hadn't heard in far too long. "Sure, kiddo. Let's see if I can still beat you." The test of time. As the days passed, we continued to move forward. We had our moments of laughter, our moments of frustration, and our moments of reflection. Life was no longer a chaotic storm of lies. It was just life. But as the weeks stretched on, something was still pulling at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there were more secrets, more questions that still hadn't been answered. I had spent so much time trying to understand the lies, to reconcile my place in Noah's life, and yet some part of me knew there was more to this story. There had to be. One night, I was sitting in the kitchen, my mind spinning with thoughts of the past. Emily walked in, her eyes tired but warm. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, pushing aside the clutter on the table. "Yeah, of course." She sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes avoided mine for a moment, but then she looked up, taking a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what happened. About Noah." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "And I think there's something you need to know." My pulse quickened, and I leaned forward. "What is it, Emily?" Her eyes were filled with something, regret, fear, maybe both. "There's more. Something you don't know. Something I didn't tell you." I swallowed hard. The air between us seemed to stretch thin, like I was standing at the edge of something I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. Emily continued, her voice shaky. "It's about Noah. It's about who he really is." I could feel my heart racing, the weight of her words sinking in. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, gathering her thoughts. I lied to you, Caleb. I did know who Noah's father was. I blinked, unable to make sense of what she was saying. I stood there, frozen, staring at Emily as the weight of her words sank in like a stone dropping into still water. There was another man. The truth, it seemed, was far from over. I had spent so long trying to piece together what had happened with Luke, trying to understand the twisted family dynamics, that I hadn't even thought there might be more. Emily's eyes were wide, her breath shallow. Caleb, I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I swallowed, my heart pounding. Who? Who was this other man, Emily? She shook her head slowly. I never told you because, well, I thought it was better for Noah not to know. But I can't keep hiding it. He has the right to know. My mind was spinning. My world was unraveling once more. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to steady. You have to tell me everything. Right now. Emily nodded, her face pale, as though the truth had been clawing at her for years and now it was too heavy to keep inside any longer. It was someone you knew, Caleb. Someone close to us, a family member. It wasn't Luke. The blood drained from my face. What do you mean? It wasn't Luke? But you just said... Luke is his father, she interrupted, her voice quiet but firm. But Noah's genetic father, the man who really fathered him, it was Daniel. I felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath me. The room spun, the words so incomprehensible, so shocking, that I couldn't fully grasp what Emily was saying. Daniel? I whispered. You're telling me Noah is Daniel's son? She nodded, her eyes filled with a kind of regret I hadn't expected from her. It happened before Luke and I got together, before anything with you happened, but I didn't tell you. I couldn't. I stumbled back, my head feeling light, as if I was losing my footing in reality. The man who had stood by my side, the one who had been part of our family, was the father of my son? The revelation hit harder than anything I'd ever felt. This is insane. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to sort through the madness. But why? Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know how to, she whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I thought if I kept it quiet, things could go on as normal. I thought Noah would never need to know, but I was wrong. I could barely breathe. So Daniel, he knew he was Noah's father this whole time? Emily shook her head. No, he didn't know. He never found out. It was all a mistake, Caleb. A mistake that spiraled out of control. A long silence stretched between us. I could hear the pounding of my own heart in my ears, the dissonant noise of a life I didn't recognize anymore. Emily wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to tear apart our family. But now Noah deserves the truth, even if it tears everything apart. I walked to the window, trying to find some semblance of clarity, but all I saw was chaos. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had built my life around, was crumbling. I turned back to Emily. You have to tell Daniel. He deserves to know. Noah deserves to know. She nodded, her face stricken with guilt. I'll tell him. I've been putting it off, but I can't anymore. Noah has a right to decide who he wants in his life. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. But as I looked at her, at the woman who had once been my everything, the one who had once shared my dreams, I realized there was no way to undo the past. There was no going back. But maybe, just maybe, we could try to rebuild again. The confrontation, that. Evening, I found myself sitting in the quiet of our living room, waiting. Emily had gone to Daniel's house, finally ready to face the truth, ready to confront him with what had happened. Noah had gone to bed early, unaware of the bombshell that had just been dropped. He was safe, unaware of the turmoil that was once, again threatening to tear apart everything he had come to know. As I sat there, I felt a strange sense of foreboding. I had no idea how Daniel would react. Would he feel betrayed by the secrecy? Would he be angry at Emily? Would he be angry with me? I heard the sound of the doorbell ring, and my pulse quickened. I stood up, walking toward the door, my hands clammy. When I opened it, I found Daniel standing on the doorstep. He looked different, older, more somber. His usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something darker. "Caleb," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk." I nodded and stepped aside, letting him in. "Where is Emily?" Daniel looked away for a moment before answering. She's telling me everything." I could see the tension in his face, the weight of the knowledge finally sinking in. He was processing everything as it hit him, just as I had. Just as we all had. He walked into the living room, his steps slow, deliberate. "I didn't know." His voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't know about Noah. I didn't know any of this." I felt my chest tighten. "I had no idea either, Daniel. None of us did." The days following Daniel's revelation were filled with a strange, heavy quiet. The air seemed thick with anticipation, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Daniel and I spent more time together than we had in years, but it wasn't the comfortable camaraderie we once shared. No, this time, there was an unspoken tension between us, a fragile understanding that we both had responsibilities we weren't sure how to face. Emily kept her distance, not because she didn't want to be around, but because she knew that the decision was out of her hands. She had spoken her truth. The rest, whether Noah would be ready, whether Daniel would step into the role of father, whether we could move past the damage, was now for us to figure out. And so, we waited. The conversation. With Noah, it was that weekend when everything changed again. Noah had spent the afternoon outside with friends, and when he returned, there was something different in the way he carried himself. He was quieter, more introspective, as though he had been grappling with something he couldn't fully explain. I was in the kitchen when I saw him. His small frame stood in the doorway, his eyes scanning the room, but he seemed distant, like he was searching for something just beyond reach. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Noah didn't immediately answer. Instead, he walked slowly toward the table and sat down. His fingers traced the edge of the table absent-mindedly as he looked up at me. "I was talking to Luke," he said, his voice soft. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Luke? What about?" He told me. About the way things used to be, about the family before all the stuff with me and Daniel. He hesitated, his eyes darting nervously. He said that we need to figure out how this all fits together. I didn't know how to respond. There was a part of me that wanted to shield him from this confusion, to protect him from the jagged truths that were still being uncovered. But I knew it was impossible. The pieces had already scattered, and now Noah had to navigate this broken puzzle himself. "Well," I began carefully, "things are complicated, Noah, and sometimes the people we love do things that make us question everything, but that doesn't change the fact that we care about you." He nodded slowly, his eyes clouded, with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "I know, but it's hard. I feel like I don't know who to believe, or what's real anymore." I walked over to him, sitting down beside him. "No one expects you to have all the answers right now. You don't have to figure it out by yourself." His gaze met mine, and in that moment I saw something fragile, vulnerable yet resilient. He was carrying the weight of everything we had failed to protect him from, and somehow he was still trying to make sense of it all. I think I just need to know what everyone wants from me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "Noah, you don't have to choose anything. You don't have to be the glue that holds everyone together. We're the ones who should be doing that." His lips trembled, but he forced a smile, looking down at his hands. It's so much to handle," I nodded. "I know, kid, I know." Daniel's decision. A few days later, Daniel came by again. He hadn't seen Noah since the truth had come out, and despite his earlier hesitation, I knew that now was the moment. The time had come for him to step forward, not just as an uncle, but as something more. When Daniel entered the house, his eyes flickered toward Noah, who was sitting at the kitchen table, his head buried in a book. There was a heavy silence between them, thick with unspoken words. Noah looked up, and their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them said anything, and in that silence, I could see the ghosts of the past hanging between them. Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "Hey, Noah." Noah gave him a small, tentative smile. "Hey, Uncle Daniel." There was an awkward pause, and then Daniel stepped forward. He cleared his throat again, his voice steady but full of emotion. I know things have been a little confusing, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for not being there when you needed me most." Noah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of the book in front of him. "I think you deserve the truth," Daniel continued, his voice thick. "And I want you to know that I'm here for you. I don't expect anything from you, but I want you to know that if you want me to be in your life, I'll be there." I could see Noah's expression shift, and for a moment, I thought he might say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, he just nodded, his eyes still lowered. It wasn't the big emotional moment that I had expected, but in its quiet way, it was something more real, something deeper.